Welcome back to fight number three. I think I want to preface the top three with the idea that we all did kind of personal lists when we got started when figuring out the top three. And ironically, this was the same top three for all three of our lists. The order was just different. So, like, my number one was different than Volt's number one, and Volt's number one was Rue's number two. That was my number three, so on and so forth. But it was the same three no matter what. So, it really kind of showcases
Rare moment of consensus amongst us.
until we started arguing about what order to actually put them in. But so the point is, I think these three are really interchangeable. You could just completely, based on your preference, move the number three to the number one, and vice versa, and you wouldn't really get a fight from any of us. These three are all pretty amazing in their own ways. They do three very different things, but each thing they do, they excel at.
These fights are
Yeah.
all fantastic. And yeah, no, they're all fantastic and excellent job to everyone involved in them.
Like this, and one person dislikes this.
I will fucking murder that one person. So, future plots of killing aside, Volt, since you have the least amount of bias in their number three pick, do you want to introduce it?
Oh yeah, sure. Number three. Anyways, so after all this suspense, I can say that our number three fight is Jeremiah versus Leonardo Thane.
It
On
only took
page-
us 2 years to get there.
Almost as long as it took to finish chapter 5.
You can find on chapter 5 starting at page 33.
You can tell he had his notes prepared.
Remember when we were getting out of the last meeting, we're like, we're going to be so ready to not stumble over each other, and here we are.
Yeah, I gotta warm back up. We should have saved the honorable mentions for this warm up.
As we've already addressed throughout the several fights already, Chapter 5 involves our crew invading the island of Mordheim, looking for to steal the plans of a Sky Corps or Flight Corps, which they can, use to become the first Sky Pirates. Anyways, shenanigans happen. Someone has their love interest turned into a huge kaiju.
Poor Bedalia.
Grown man gets beaten by a girl in a wheelchair. Stuff like that happens.
Leto actually did something.
And it all ends in a big climatic climax between the leader of our pirates, Leonardo Thane, and the leader of the infamous light company, Jeremiah Stanhope.
I feel like Jeremiah got a better introduction.
Don't worry about it too much.
It's deserved.
Speaking of Jeremiah, we haven't had a chance to really talk about this character too much on the podcast. I kind of think we should start with a little introduction of good old Jeremiah Stanhope.
I agree. Rue, would you like to do the honors?
So, Colonel Jeremiah Sandhope is, as mentioned, the leader of the 101st Strike Regiment, colloquially known as Light Company. He's characterized as sort of this quietly menacing, I don't know what word to go with, but he's just kind of this,
Stoic?
at least at first. He presents himself as stoic, and then when you get him going, he becomes more and more bloodthirsty and riled up, as he would say. And
I don't know if bloodthirsty is the right word, but he definitely he lives for the thrill of combat. So maybe almost like an adrenaline junkie a little bit.
yeah. So adrenaline junkie, and he gets a little more boisterous. He gets a little more wild. He gets a little more loud, which Leo learns much to his detriment, at least for a little while.
Now, there's a lot of talking in this fight. For every punch thrown, they share a monologue.
Yeah, I mentioned in the text chat here, I was going through the fight, reading through it, and it reminded me that in the year of our Lord 2018, I was writing Jeremiah's dialogue in a way that I had kind of forgotten I'd done it. Like, he talks in a unique way compared to other characters.
Yeah, no, you definitely have a knack for giving a little bit of a verbal dialect in your writing to your characters, which helps them stand out.
Well, it comes down to, the way words are spelled and what order those words appear in, and I feel like I more or less successfully conveyed that he is a large man with an Australian accent who likes to yell at his enemies.
He does. And on the note of that, I think that's probably a perfect segue into one of the first things about this fight that's really interesting is this fight is when we talk about what makes a fight good, it's not just about what's like who's punching who, how cool was that technique, etc. The other part is what does this fight mean for the overarching story and does this fight have any deeper meaning? This fight ends up being a philosophical argument just as much as a bunch of fisticuffs. Leo and Jeremiah are both leaders, and it's very clear their dialogue throughout this entire fight is this combination of leaders' ideology and them both kind of learning how to either respect or learn from the other. This is a lot of this fight is Leo gradually winning Jeremiah's respect, and a lot of Leo kind of formulating his own ideas of what it means to be a leader and what it is to take responsibility for the actions of your crew. A lot of the later ideology we get from Leonardo's pacifism actually gets its roots in this fight with Jeremiah about the idea of responsibility, and it's all because of these two, the novice versus the veteran, the idyllic youth versus the pessimistic old guard. We really get that clash here.
And pessimistic.
Well, it's a little pessimistic, but we're not gonna. You and me could probably go into this argument and derail this podcast for 65 minutes, so let's not do that.
So be good. But please continue.
So when we talk about like how you write dialogue for Jeremiah or how I write dialogue for Leo, both those really get a shine. There is literally a metric ton of dialogue in this fight. But it's also one of the things that makes it really interesting because there's more at stake here than just like who can throw a punch better. It's really about this idea of who I don't want to say who's right, but who can take the way the most from this interaction.
It's basically like a clash of ideals, like Leo's pacifism, his urge to, save lives, keep people safe, versus Jeremiah's more, I guess you could say, pragmatic way of going about things.
For sure.
Pragmatic and pessimistic, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's actually a quote here I want to read from Jeremiah, if that's cool, which is every drop of blood spilt, every life lost. That's on both of us, boy. We gave those orders, we led the charges, and we will answer for those crimes at the end. I know what I am, but can you really say the same? And I think that's a really good opening for this idea of what this fight's going to be is Jeremiah is not necessarily trying to break Leo mentally, but he can't help but like take this time to almost like tutor him a little bit because Leo, despite trying to stab him, is also listening to every word he says.
hmm And just to continue on with the quotes, there's one from Leo that I want to mention, and I'm so basically as the fight begins, Leo says, "You think my hesitance to own this body count as cowardice, but it's not that at all. My rejection of it is I haven't given up on finding a better way." And then it continues with, "And I will continue to save and spare as many people as possible, including you." Just that including you, I really liked, because it just showed the extent of Leo's dedication to, trying to save lives, trying to avoid killing.
No, and for sure, and I think and not to go like spoiler alert, but spoiler alert, there's we definitely use that line as some foreshadowing of how this fight's going to end as well, which is really nice because very rarely do you actually get to pull off foreshadowing in a roleplay format.
hmm
Yes, it's so well done that I didn't even quite catch it the first time through.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, so going into this fight is essentially the setup is we're coming to the end of the Mordheim arc. In many ways, this is the final fight of the chapter. There's kind of some like epilogue splash little fights, just cool down stuff that takes place afterwards, especially with Calandra hunting we're kind of like company wins at the end and kind of escorts them back to their ship. But this is really the climax of the action for the chapter, and this is everything you want in a final fight. And the setup essentially is at this point is, if you remember, this takes place right after fight number 10, where Tal, Leo, Kaya, and Sonya take out a bunch of guards. But at this point, Jeremiah is showing up. They're fighting on this like narrow stone bridge on this mountainside with a giant gap beneath them. There's like a destroyed communications hub on one side, a destroyed training yard on the other side. So rubble is littered everywhere. And Sonya's out of commission. She's got no mana left. Tao's essentially bleeding to death, unconscious. Leo has been through the ringer a whole bunch of times, and so has Jeremiah. At this point, too, Jeremiah, I think, has fought the honorable mention of Shiori and Hora. He had to fight off a coup of platoon guards, and he's just been running around this entire time. So both these characters are exhausted. They're facing off with each other in this kind of leader versus leader. Leo realizes that Jeremiah doesn't know who Kaya is pretty quickly. So in an attempt to kind of keep her black blood a secret, he doesn't. He tells Kaya to back off and let him fight Jeremiah one on one. So the colonel doesn't get an idea of what he's actually dealing with, and it forces these two to a one on one duel where they have to pull out all the stops.
And boy, do they. I would say that at least up to this point, this was maybe one of the more brutal fight scenes ever put to page in Aria's history.
Oh, both these guys take a beating throughout this fight, and that doesn't even count the beating they had taken before the fight even started. Like one of the examples, just I think to showcase. I think Leo's been attacked by Crow, shot through the leg, experienced Larkin's fear gas, thrown around as a ragdoll by Tau, survived an artillery barrage. Before we get to this fight,
Before on that last one.
yeah. But I think one like a really good example to me of like why this fight is like all the stops is this is the first fight where Leo ever uses multiple fabrication modes in a fight. And in all 5 chapters, it had never happened up until this point where he had to actually use more than one mode to the point he uses 4 modes, 2 of them for the first time in this fight alone, because Jeremiah just like completely pushes him against a corner and forces him to bring out every tactic in the book.
I think it's notable partly because, I mean, officers of the Federation have appeared before, but I think this is the first time any of the heroes have faced one directly.
We have had the task force back to chapter 2, kind of, but that was out of them. I feel like only Quinn was the one who could actually be considered a officer in a full-on officer in the Federation.
Like of rank rather than, prowess.
Yes.
Jeremiah is definitely the first old guard officer that we got, though, because any other officers we get are definitely a lot younger or newer. But like Jeremiah is made from certain stuff. He has seen battles. Like there's this whole mentality with Jeremiah throughout this fight where even Leo kind of comments on it at one point later on in the fight where he's just like, "This is just another day for him. He's gonna like beat the shit out of me. He's gonna kill me. I'm gonna leave a scar on him, and I'm just gonna be another one of his like 100 war stories. That's all my like." That is all I'm going to be at the end of the day if I lose to Jeremiah. And it's just a really good example of like this almost mountain of experience the Colonel has over Leo.
No, I just want to say that I just really like how Jeremiah was portrayed in this chapter. Like he feels like less of like a person and more like a presence, I guess you could say, kind of like a storm. That's
No, I agree with that too. He almost like he's not someone to be like you're trying to beat a force of nature almost.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's, just to go a little off topic, it's reflective of his relationship with Rear Admiral Praya because obviously she's a higher rank and we do get to see a little bit of her in action, so you get a taste of what real officers are like.
Mm-hmm.
But within the relationship of this chain of command, Praya is always one that likes to come out from the shadows, stay behind and let the people under her do the heavy work.
Yeah. So, anyways, but going into this fight, like this is just such a good piece because like Jeremiah is that opposing figure. Leo is essentially fighting injured and outgunned in this entire fight. Like I think there's one of my favorite examples of just showcasing like how much Jeremiah is in control of this fight is. It's a little later, but the blurb reads as such as. At the last second, Jeremiah snatched the pitch stone out of the air, the impact stinging his hand, though it didn't slow him quickly as the boy might have hoped. I forgot to mention the context is Leo so desperate he throws a rock at Jeremiah. With a quick reverse and underhanded throw, Jeremiah pitched the stone back at Leo, caught the pirate captain on the shoulder. Staggering Leo, Jeremiah lunged up the rubble pile and grabbed Leo by the collar. This ain't no schoolyard, you bitzer. No points for kitty tactics. And it just kind of just showcases that like Leo is doing everything he can, and this is just not even. It's hurting Jeremiah, but it's not phasing him.
Basically, feels like for Leo at least, it's less of a case of trying to win and more just a case of trying to survive.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like Leo is desperate throughout this entirety of this fight, and almost never feels like he has the edge until probably actually one of my personal favorite sword reveals and I've ever written for Leo, which is the reveal of Devour mode, which is works really well into both from like a functional fighting standpoint, but it also is a really kind of an interesting ideological standpoint because that's also when Leo reveals Devour mode is also when he kind of comes to terms with this idea of pacifism where he'll turn something bad into something good. And he turns Abe's destructive power from chapter 4 into a sword that can control magic. Or not to control magic, but essentially absorb magic. And he uses that to cut through and destroy the reinforced coat that Jeremiah wears, which is essentially like a bulletproof, sword proof, everything proof coat that's been keeping Leo from doing any real damage this entire chapter. Like, I think we were talking about this. Like, I think Leo cuts Jeremiah's cheek like 4 or 5 times before like we get to this point in the fight because that's the only part of his body that was exposed. But once the sword comes out, he actually like Jeremiah just blocks it with his coat, thinking, I'm just gonna block it like always, and it cuts right through, leaving like this deep gash in his arm. And it's the first real, which is kind of like awesome from this idea of like this tactic is what else hurts Jeremiah, but it's the idea that Leo's commitment to the ideology is also what makes him land the first real blow on Jeremiah. It just ties their whole argument and conversation back into the actual actions happening in the fight in just a way that you don't really see in any other fights on this list.
I also just want to say that just how the Leo's like little speech he makes when he activates Devour mode, like how he calls out the Federation for what they've done to Abe and Solomus and all that, and just how he also kind of expands on his beliefs, his ideals a bit, and how he plans to take a responsibility for the people who've died, people who've been injured, and all that. And just I don't know, I just feel like it was a very nice character moment that helped add a bit of extra oomph to the the shonen power up he got.
Oh yeah, no, it's great. Um, and even while like I know I'm kind of complimenting myself with that, I'm also like it's definitely some of my favorite writing for Leo ever. Um,
I agree with that.
Leo and Jeremiah made my I think that was my number two. I'm pretty sure. Um, but I think the other we've been talking a lot about how they're different, but there's also like I kind of want to play unless Rue wants any other little specific fight moments you want to call out. Like, was there anything about this fight that like a moment or anything that stood out to you specifically?
Well, I was just gonna point out number one, the rock exchange is one of my favorites, just because not does it not only does it provide a contrast between the two of them, it's also just funny.
It is a little bit of levity, yeah.
But there are a couple of other things that are really notable, and mostly it just one of the things that is that a lot of what Jeremiah throws at Leo comes down to just like raw anything goes tactics. Like at some point, I Jeremiah towards the end when his coat's getting all torn up, he throws it off and then he uses it to try to strangle Leo.
Yeah, he does. He does. I forgot about that.
I had to find a reference image for exactly what it looked like because there was a little bit of confusion about it, but it just goes to show that Jeremiah will use anything and everything he can get his hands on.
I was gonna say, I think they really kind of poised that because like, cause we're not really doing the play by plays of these fights, but the context is like this. Oh, this fight for like super cliff notes is like Jeremiah opens with a machine gun. Leo goes with Gale mode to take range. Jeremiah responds with like grenades. Leo closes the distance. And pulls out blood mode or crimson mode for the first time to create a shield so he can charge out of a trench. They get into close quarters. Jeremiah pulls out a revolver and like puts him in like a chokehold. Leo pulls out a fabrication blade and like burns Jeremiah for getting that close to him. It's just this constant back and forth of like them going through everything in their arsenal. Like Jeremiah burns through like 2 grenades and like 3 guns in his coat. Leo goes through all 4 sword modes. He uses all his little stun grenades. Like they burn their entire arsenals on each other.
Right, and then like the third thing I was going to mention is that near the end of this, Jeremiah breaks Leo's arm.
Actually, before we get to the ending, because I don't want to get there quite yet. But yeah, essentially the other piece too is I think of the idea of just wanting to finish the point about before we get to the breaking of the arm. Like this fight ends like after all those like fancy tactics and like throwing rocks at each other, using every single weapon they can, trying to outsmart each other, outflank each other. This literally boils down to the very end of them in like freaking fisticuffs. Like Leo tackles Jeremiah and starts punching the crap out of him. Jeremiah flips him and then just starts punching the crap out of Leo. Like it gets like really gritty because like I said, they just bring out everything they got. Like they're running out fumes at the end of this fight, both of them.
No, yeah, I mean to go back a bit, it kind of definitely gives off similar vibes to Jeremiah's fight with Shiori. Absolutely pragmatic, no hope. Yeah, just just brutal, all that stuff.
No hearts barred.
That's it. Yes, that is how I say that in English. Anyways, it just gives a really good idea of how brutal Jeremiah is, how like he forgoes being all over the top and I guess anime you could say in favor of just being like straight business, I guess you could say.
There kind of is a little bit of a clash in the writing styles too, because like we both had music attached to these fighting styles, which I don't think the links really work anymore when we were reviewing the fight. But like I remember for Leo, it's like a lot of like My Hero Academia OSTs to support his music, and then for like Jeremiah, you have like these like heavy metal riffs for Ruse posts, and it just plays into this idea of like the anime protagonist versus like the gritty military like video game colonel. It somehow like despite the fact it feels like they're from two different worlds, like that's also kind of what makes it engaging and compelling.
No, I fully agree.
And then I think we've talked a lot about how these guys are different, but they have a lot of overlapping character traits that are the same, which is why I want to talk about that real quick before we just talk about the ending of the fight because I think that kind of plays into it. There is an interesting parallel when I was rereading this fight that I noticed is Leo and Roche, Leo and Jeremiah both are very reliant on their crews for strength. There's like two times in this fight where Jeremiah will use hand to hand tactics. That he'll reference like he learned this from Roche or he learned this from Lindsay, and he's like replicating his underling subordinates like techniques to get the better hand on Leo. Where Leo's using things like Gale mode and Inferno mode and Crimson mode, which are all sword modes he gained from his allies, like from Sonya, Kaya, Tal. So there is really this idea that they're both like it is competing leaders, and they're both fueled by the people who work under them. Which is really plays into this idea that like this is a leader versus a leader, which is part of what makes this fight so interesting. And there's that idea that we have also said like you kind of get this vibe throughout their entire conversation, like they're trying to kill each other, but they don't really dislike each other. Like you could genuinely see a version of events where like these two could get along in like an alternative setting. Like Leo's listening to what Jeremiah is saying, and Jeremiah is gradually getting more and more impressed with Leo the more he sees.
No, yeah, there's a sense of like maybe not friends, but if this wasn't like a life or death struggle, and like if Leo was not a pirate, then they could have at least like gotten along, maybe even had like a student mentor esque kind of relationship in a sense.
Yeah, you definitely get the vibe like enemies today, something else tomorrow, possibly. And if we didn't meet on the battlefield, this would have been a very different relationship.
Exactly. Exactly.
In many ways, a classic confrontation, but a good one.
And I think that's a good segue to get into the part that folks want to talk about the ending of this fight, which involves because I'm just going to do the quick play by play just to kind of get everyone up to speed. Essentially, it involves Jeremiah at this point has beaten the crap out of Leo. He breaks Leo's arm at the very end of it, and Leo's got nothing left. He's like he can barely move, he can barely see. Like he'd have like the whole like blood dripping down his face, one eye swollen. Um, and Jeremiah is essentially kind of like lecturing him, and like I can always picture this perfectly in my head, where like he gets behind Leo and like grabs Leo by the back of his like damaged collar and is just like limping himself, dragging Leo to the edge of the bridge where he's gonna essentially throw Leo to his death. And he's just kind of like going like, "Yeah, you're pretty good, kid. Not good enough, but you're pretty good, kid." And he's getting ready to like despite the fact like he's has zero ill will to Leo at this point. He's like, "I gotta kill you because that's the job." And Leo just happens to see a grenade from his belt that's just kind of hanging out there, and like, and it's just complete desperate like Hail Mary gambit. Leo pops the grenade at both of their feet, and I think he may throw it like maybe like a meter in front of them, but like danger close. And the grenade explodes and it cracks like it's just the classic like the bridge breaks right in the middle, and it explodes like right in front of both of them. And in the smoke, it's not clear what happens. But then when the smoke passes, Jeremiah's hanging off the cliff, like dangling to his death, and the only thing that's keeping him from falling is Leo's caught him with his broken arm while using like his good arm like on a railing, and is holding Jeremiah up.
No, yeah, that is exactly what I wanted to talk about. Since the whole like image of Leo saving the, I don't even want to call him a villain, but like the one of like the main antagonists of that chapter, just
Maybe like Leo saving the greatest opponent he's fought to this point.
basically, yeah, just by using an arm that was pretty much shattered and is probably hurting like crazy. Is just the perfect embodiment of his dedication to saving lives and pacifism in a sense.
And I
And
also, I was gonna say, I also appreciate in this too, where like instead of having the dramatic like sequence where like Jeremiah's like, "Let me go, you'll only get us both killed. Like you have to let me go. You have to be ruthless." Jeremiah essentially goes, "Well, fuck it. If you're gonna try and like save me, I'm gonna try and save myself," and like starts trying to make the most of it himself to get out of the situation.
I do like how he mentions like in his monologue that how someone like Lorcan might have tried to like squirm and like try and bring Leo down with them, but Jeremiah is too pragmatic. He sees like what's going on, and actually tries to aid Leo and
Saving his life. Yeah.
Well, yeah, nobody wants to die.
yeah.
And if the opportunity presents itself, why not?
No, yeah, I do like that because I feel like in like a lot of pieces of fiction, like you see like villains and people, being a bit too like nonchalant about dying, but no, Jeremiah is he knows what he should do.
Yeah, he's like fucking like if I can live, let's give it a shot. Okay, I'll give it my A game.
Yeah, exactly. Just a nice touch that I appreciate.
And this definitely cements the moment where like this feels like probably one of the most heroic acts that Leo's ever done in the story. It's also worth noting both of them still would have died if Kaya didn't come in and intervene at the last second, and essentially pulled them both up and then yelled at them.
Leo literally has the power of God and enemy on his side.
Yeah, a little bit. Oh, and I also love how like Kaya just scolds them and it's just like you two are done.
She's telling off a pair of fighting children. It's great.
But it works perfectly into this idea that like I said, it's a super intense fight. It's got the entire stakes of the chapter on the line, but it's never it always because of the dialogue that they have. You can get away with that ending where it ends with them Leo saving his life and Kaya scolding the two of them, and then being like, "Okay, we're done."
Exactly. It's kind of like what we discussed with the whole Tri Dragons fight from at the beginning of this podcast. How like, well, some might consider such an ending anticlimactic. It works with their dialogue and all that, and their relationship with one another.
It also just feels earned. Like this ending really doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it comes too soon or too late. It just comes to exactly where it needs to be, and it's an easy pill to swallow. It's like it almost feels like any other ending would have been the bad ending.
Hmm. Also, I think Dewey did a small like video of this.
She does. That's yeah, one of the gifs of that fight. Yeah, yeah. There's actually two pieces of art for this fight from Dewey.
Mhm.
Well, that sums about all my thoughts on that. Did you have anything extra, Rue?
Well, no, I think it's been pretty well covered.
All right, so that's our fight number 3, Leo versus Jeremiah. Um, the only small detriment to this fight, if we're going to talk about that just even briefly, would be the fact that there's not really much in the way of this. They have no personal connection. Leo and Jeremiah are strangers before this moment. Like they have one very, very brief interaction before this.
Even at the start, Jeremiah is making the comparisons to Isaac.
Yeah, it's very clear they don't really know who each other are. Like Leo's never really heard of Light Company. Jeremiah's never heard of Leo. So this like that's probably the biggest detriment. It's just there's no history. Which is probably why I say fight number 2 edges out this fight because there is nothing but personal history between this next two fighters.